Hi everyone, I'm Harv, Ian Harvey, founder of Collective Intelligence, and this is Stuff That Matters Now. Welcome back everybody. I am sitting down today with a very unique individual in Trevor Cook, here in downtown Fielding. Welcome, Trevor.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, it is.
Ian, yes.
And we are just come out of, we're on level 2 lockdown, and Trevor, it's wonderful to get you here sitting down because I know you're on the road often, and I saw this as an opportunity to grab you before you start back on the road again doing your work all around New Zealand. So it was a great opportunity. I thought I'll nab him before his calendar gets filled up.
Which would be, from next Monday on, would have been very difficult.
It would be very difficult.
Captured me.
Yeah. So Trevor and I go back a wee way from years in the farming world, and I've worked with Trevor in the practical sphere. And so Trevor, just could you frame up what your work is today across New Zealand, and often across the globe, but you're confined to New Zealand at the moment. So how would you define yourself today?
Most of my work today is working with farmers to try and, at the bottom line, increase the profitability of their farming systems, but most of that is through increasing productivity. So a lot of it is about making the systems they've got work better, but in a lot of cases it also is looking at whether the systems they have got are the best systems that they could have if their objective is to make more money. But we've got to be careful that not all farmers have that sole objective. And I often make the comment that the journey is the important part, not the destination. So profit has to be seen in the context of where you want to be and what you want your life to be. But in the end, for most, certainly sheep and beef farmers, there is a big attraction in doing something that enables them to make more money.
And Trevor, your specialty is in sheep and beef, a little bit in deer?
Yep.
Not so much dairy?
Virtually no dairy now.
Right. And your clients are based throughout New Zealand?
Yes.
And you've done, in the recent times, you've done a lot of work internationally as well?
Yes.
And is that physically going over there and seeing farmers offshore?
Yes, I've probably for 10 years I've been going twice a year to the other side of the world. So I've got farming clients that I was going to twice a year in the UK, in France, and Denmark.
And why would they use a Kiwi vet to do that?
Because all the farmers that I work with over there have moved into pastures as their primary feed resource. And so for them it's a major, major change from what they've done in the past. And so there was the perception that because I would come from New Zealand, I knew a lot about using pastures to make animals perform.
And is that valid?
I think it is very valid in that I'm not saying that I'm by far anywhere near the best, but certainly have a vast experience of helping New Zealand farmers use pastures better to increase their productivity. But it's quite different in that in New Zealand, that increase in productivity is by using pastures is just using pastures better to get more from what you're doing. Whereas for those farmers over there, using pastures was the biggest benefit was reducing their costs. And so some of those farmers have undergone absolutely massive changes from using pastures just as an adjunct to their feed resource and primarily using concentrates or added external feeds to support production, to flipping that right around the other way to where pastures are their primary feed resource, where they might use supplements to fill in the holes here and there. Absolutely massive change.
And Trevor, how did they find you from the other side of the world? How did they find you?
It all started from a farm consultant in France who happened to be an Irishman, but had lived his life in France but had worked in New Zealand, so he had experience of New Zealand farming systems, and he was bringing groups of French farmers over to look at New Zealand farming, and somehow he got my contact. I have no idea how, and every time he brought them over, he would get me to entertain them, if you'd call it that, and take them to farms and talk about our farming systems. And after that had gone on for 2 or 3 years, he saw value in me talking to a wider French farmer group by going to France. He was also having quite a lot of contact with particularly Scottish farmers that were starting to move into using pastures, so I got introduced to them. He took me along as an adjunct to what he was doing, and so that introduced me to them. And I guess that whole relationship has grown from there.
And Trevor, what have you, from that particular work, and I'm going to go back very soon to where you started from in your professional career, but if you look at this particular international work, what are the key things that you've learnt from that work, working over there?
That the willingness or the desire to be better has a very firm basis in profitability. So, for example, in all those European farmers are subsidised, but the level of subsidy varies from country to country, and each country determines where that subsidy goes. So in France, a huge proportion of that subsidy goes to farmers. So French farmers are very, very heavily subsidised. You go to the UK where they are nowhere near as subsidised as those farmers in France. So it has been much easier to get Scottish and English farmers to look at the opportunity to be more profitable than it has been French farmers, and I'd put it purely down to the level of subsidy.
And what impact does that have on behaviour, Trevor?
Well, the biggest behaviour is being open to change and actually seeing that opportunity.
Right. And I'm going to get to this later on because I'm really interested in how COVID has affected what's happened in Europe compared to here, because it's been a lot harsher over there. Now, maybe we go to that now, because one of the things that's really interesting is that New Zealand farming has been mildly affected by COVID, hasn't been huge, where in the Northern Hemisphere it's been majorly affected because it's been a lot harsher over there. What changes do you see happening over there as a result of the severity compared to here?
Well, the only change that I'm aware of is their stock sales. I mean, in terms of farm management, I'm not aware of any change. They've carried on as per normal. But the way that the stock sales have changed to be so much online, where so many of the stud sales are online, and how successful that has been. They've cut out a whole sector in that wholesale hierarchy, which you might argue New Zealand has added no value to our farming systems at all. And I really applaud them for doing that, because they have shown that those middle people, and this is generalisation because there are some ones that do add value, but that middle sector don't add much value, and take them out, and the outcomes for the breeder are actually better than when that middle sector was there.
And that's come directly from the crunch of COVID, not being able to use the sale yards and the systems.
Absolutely, yes.
Yeah.
Directly from that. Yep.
It's interesting, the wonder of adversity,
Yep.
Trevor, that when you're forced to do things, and, you know, we are having this interview 100 metres from, you know, this vast stockyard system over the road, and I look at that and how that's just continued through this phase, and I look at the cost of that, and it's a wonderful big social event.
Yep.
That's not really needed.
Yep.
Trevor, let's go back to where you started your professional career. So you were a hands-on operating large animal vet. Is that what you're called?
Yep. In today's terms, it's a production animal vet. Yeah.
Right. And so you were based, when I first met you, I think you were the resident vet or for the Pahongana area, which is in the Manawatū.
Yeah, Pahongana Apathy was my stamping ground, or stomping ground.
Yep.
And I just knew every farm, knew every dog, knew every family member. It was an amazing time where it was just I was part of their community. It was an extraordinary time in terms of developing such strong relationships with all these farmers, and you get to know them so well. You become someone they trust and someone that they'll talk to about all sorts of stuff that they might not talk to other people about. It was a remarkable time.
And how many farmers would you be hands-on working with that? How many farms would you be operating over?
Now?
No, back then, in that area. So what was the size of the catchment?
Well, it was from Ashurst right up to Apathy.
Yep, but for the people listening, that won't mean...
Yeah, that's right. I don't know. Is that 100 farms?
Yep.
You know, that sort of league.
Yep. And that was literally going on farm and helping them with their veterinary needs on farm.
Absolutely.
Yep. Very much hands-on, so dealing with their dogs.
Yeah, the dogs. I mean, I did dairy cows then.
Yep.
Their dogs, their horses, their sheep, their cattle. Yep, everything.
And then how did you transition from that to more into this space of design that you're in now?
Well, it's interesting in that one of the things that fascinated me was how many times farmers were falling into holes because they hadn't planned their animal health. So I started putting together animal health plans. So it was the very early days of formal animal health planning. At that time, veterinary practices, and to some extent it's something that really challenges veterinary practices today, is that veterinary practices survive only because they sell product. And so
we're talking about drenches and remedies. Yep.
And so that immediately creates that conflict between giving advice and selling product. But I started to get this reputation for doing animal health plans, preventative animal health plans, putting them together on the basis that these are designed for you to minimise the risk of things going wrong and not falling into holes. So other consultants around the country were dealing with their farmer clients who had animal health problems. There was this perception that veterinary advice was tainted because it was also linked to product sales. So I was being asked by consultancy companies from one end of the country to the other to go and put together preventative animal health plans on those farms that had no tags to product sales. But as I got more and more into preventative animal health, I very quickly came to realise that preventative animal health is mostly around management and nutrition, not about product use. And so I moved into that world and started to develop more skills around feed budgeting and that sort of world. But what was a really interesting consequence of doing that is that most of those consultancy companies dumped me because straight away they saw me as competition for what they were doing. And that antagonism has remained right through to today, and that's 20 years ago or more that was happening. It was bizarre. Whereas some of the more enlightened ones I still work with, and I think we complement each other very, very well.
What I think is funny, Trevor, is that what I find bizarre is I didn't see that coming.
Yeah.
I mean, they opened the gate for you to get interested in that.
So what's really interesting is I've got clients now from Northland to Southland that go right back to that time where I was introduced to them by another farm consultant who introduced me to those farms to do some animal health planning. And I've retained them as now full-on clients where I'm very much part of their businesses, helping them progress in all sorts of ways.
And I think that's that last term, all sorts of ways, is the interesting piece, because it does become really personal, doesn't it?
Well, it does become personal because, farming is a people business. It just happened to be animals are the tools that those people work with. So unless you have people that are engaged, that the possibility of adding value is very, very low.
Trevor, what are the key things that you look for? What human aspects do you look for in the farmers you want to work with?
It's a touchy bit to say, but I've got to get an assessment of capability. And so build my advice around what I perceive to be that capability. The other bit that I look for very early on is risk, how risk averse. Because farmers that are very risk averse, you have to deal with very, very differently than those others that are, are much happier taking on a bit of risk. Because farming, there's no exact way to farm. There's no exact way to farm, and there's no perfect farmer, and so there's no absolute best practice that you say to a farmer, this is how you give them that best practice, you do this and you'll be the best farmer. Because there are so many other aspects of what makes a farm successful. And those personal things very much come into that, which in turn influence how I approach, how I add value to that farm or that farming business. It is a business.
Have you ever gone into a situation where you thought, actually, I can't add value here?
Yep, absolutely. Yeah.
And what are the things that have happened for that outcome?
I take it that I just it's come because it comes in two ways. One is that you don't get asked back,
right?
But the other is that I have advised people that I don't think I can add value,
right.
and it mostly is because I just haven't been able to form a relationship of trust, a relationship of confidence. I think that's most of it.
What's been your greatest satisfaction in this new field that you've developed for yourself?
Just got these farming businesses throughout New Zealand and over the other side of the world that I just love. I know them so well. I know so much about them, but they're people that I just so much enjoy being with, and so much enjoy helping. That's the bit that I just look back on. I think, wow, I'm just so lucky to have had the opportunity to be in a situation where I can build those relationships and just enjoy doing what I do because of the people that I work with. It's nothing to do with the farms. It's all about the people.
It's funny, I was thinking I wasn't expecting that answer, but now I think about it, of course, that makes sense. What? And the thing is, the relationship is with the husband and the wife.
Oh, yes.
Yep. Because they're key, not all,
No,
but
that's right.
but a large portion of these farms, there are key relationships there, which are phenomenally important in a farming business.
Yeah.
Yep. And I think, when you and I worked together as in this capacity, it was about the whole team and the husband and wife and, all of that. And kids from time to time as well.
Yes.
Come into it.
Yeah, very much.
Going back to this international view, Trevor, we often hear from different sectors that New Zealand are the best farmers in the world, and we like to put ourselves on that pedestal. How do you respond to that?
Yeah, I think it's a very overstated perception, and it's interesting when some of my northern, Scottish particularly, Scotland is where if I've had an impact, it's mostly been in Scotland. Those farmers come out here because those farmers have really mastered the techniques of pastoral farming and setting up rotations, etc. And they come out here, and it almost hurts me to hear them say, "Don't see a lot of farmers rotationally grazing out here." I mean, I argue that there are plenty, but they observe a lot of farms that have got very lax grazing systems, and which straight away says there's a huge opportunity, but nevertheless, I think for us to be saying that we're the best farmers in the world is I don't buy that at all.
Yeah, interesting, because I've got nothing to base it on because I haven't done your work overseas, but I just cringe when I hear that because I think it's just a made-up pedestal that in self-belief, based on what? Yeah, and it always makes me cringe when I hear that.
Yeah.
Trevor, there are three things you wanted to discuss today, and you want to talk about the change mechanism within the agriculture sector, the opportunities that you're seeing coming forward, and the elements of sustainability that you're working in. Yep?
Yep.
So let's this space we're in right now, within the ag sector, what are the things that you are noticing happening on farm with changes with people? What are you seeing?
I'm seeing a lot of farmers getting bogged down with challenges that they've got before them, and sort of seeing them as they're getting so bogged down with them that they're not seeing the opportunities ahead of them. So, there's a whole lot of stuff: the greenhouse gases, the freshwater stuff, the cropping on hills. There's a whole lot of stuff.
Winter grazing.
Yeah,
yep.
and I'd be first to say that a lot of that stuff is not backed by sufficient science. A lot of that stuff is being driven by an ideology rather than looking at practical outcomes. But nevertheless, those things are there, and we have to deal with them. And right or wrong, none of them are wrong. Every one of those things we have to address, and so how do we do that, and how do we use that to add value to our farms?
Right, so turn it from an issue into an opportunity.
Yeah.
And how many farmers that you work with have that mentality?
Not a lot. I'm lucky in that when I look at my client base, it's largely with better farmers because they see value in spending some money to be better. So I am dealing with a select group really, but even in that group, there's a lot of that group are getting restrained by the level of challenge.
And is that the way they're looking at it? Is that their attitude towards the change?
Well, yes. I mean, you get into farmer forums, there's it's a self-fulfilling prophecy in a way where farmers get talking about these things, and I mean, understandably so. And it's not often that they get exposed to a different mindset about what those things are and how to manage them, and then where's that opportunity that comes from them. And I guess I'm in that role. I mean, I can empathise very much with the bits that they see as unjust and not valid and rash, etc. But we've got to get over that. We've just got to get on with it.
It's interesting, Trevor. One of the things that I remember most from working with you, there were two things. One is you used to change your mind, and that used to upset. I remember one particular manager in Hawke's Bay was very upset with you because you changed your mind, and you think, fuck, doesn't he know what he's talking about? 6 months ago he said this and now he's saying that. And I said, well, maybe he's got a bit more information and he's changed his view, but I always really enjoyed the fact you changed mine. And the other one was you sort of had this uncorruptible stance on things, that you would say things that used to upset a lot of the establishment. Mm-hmm. And I'd imagine that hasn't changed.
No, that's right.
And I think it's something that I think that's going to be one of your legacies, Trevor, is that of having conversations that other people didn't want to have.
Yeah, to some extent. Yeah.
To some extent, and what else?
Well, I don't know. I don't. Legacies aren't something that's important to me, so I don't think about them.
Okay, all right. We'll use a different word.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll bring that back into the conversation. Use a different word. But it's something I really respected you for, Trevor, because you were never wondering. You were never left wondering, what does Trevor really mean about this? And it was very, very. It gave me a lot of confidence that I knew you would say what you thought and not be influenced by any of the big companies and so forth. Mm-hmm. So we were talking before, you're working with a group up in Northland.
Yeah.
Just tell us about that work.
Oh, it's a very innovative program up there based around farmers learning off farmers. And so, there's a series of clusters up through there in Northland based around 5 farmers that are all surrounded by other farmers and being part of their journey of change. And so I'm lucky enough to have been looking after the lower north sheep and beef cluster. So 5 farms up in that area of, north of Auckland.
And so what, is this Warkworth or further north?
Warkworth up to Kaiwaka, across to Helensville.
Right, Yep. And how does that differ from the old monitor farm type program?
The same concepts, but the very much the same concepts, but not a whole community that's coming to look. It's a select group that each farmer that's associated with each farm.
Right.
Yeah.
And and the rate of change and so forth you're seeing there, what are the learnings out of that?
That the change on every farm, there's an opportunity to improve in every farm. And so to improve means undergoing or embarking on some sort of change. So in the first instance, identifying that change is the start. But then it's how you actually get that change to work. I think the barrier, I've learned that the barrier is in how to implement. And I don't think we invest enough time into helping farmers implement change. We spend a lot of time identifying the opportunity to change and just we draft out, do this, do this, this and this. But in actual fact, and it varies from farmer to farmer, that there's a different level of support needed to actually implement that change. It's relatively subtle, but it is more than we generally think.
Yeah, I was thinking in my previous world that it was come up with the idea, then get on with it. Yeah. So the subtlety of implementation.
Yeah.
And so you've got the strategy, but what are the tactics needed to implement that?
Absolutely.
Right. And you think that's a missing piece at the moment?
Well, it's not a bit that we focus enough on.
It's not very sexy, is it?
No. But of course, what I said right at the start, one of the comments right at the start, you've got to build into that capability. And so that change in how it's implemented is so linked to capability as well as willingness to change.
Yep. Trevor, what's the range of capability, profitability in the sheep and beef sector from the top quartile to the rest? Is there much of a gap?
It's huge. It's
really?
Massive. It's massive. So in the Manawatū Class 4 hill country for 2019-20, the top quintile gross margin is around about $1,000 a hectare. The middle quintile is in the low 400s.
Right.
That's the middle, not the low. It's a huge opportunity, or huge difference, which straight away says to me, opportunity.
And, well, that's a big difference, eh?
Yeah.
Enormous difference. And the average punter driving past wouldn't be able to see that?
No, not at all.
And what are the main things that group and the top group doing, the $1,000 a hectare compared to the 400s, what are the main differences between those groups and what they're doing?
It's a whole number of things. Because you look in there, one of the big differences will be just straight stocking rate. But then what are the elements that allows that farm to have a higher stocking rate than that other farm that's got a lower one? And it's mostly in feed management, your feed management systems. So, that's probably one of the biggest differences, biggest areas that enable one farm to be much more profitable than another. And then you come down to per head performance, flock performance. In today's world of flock, doing 150% is actually very profitable use of land. But then I'd equally say, if you've got 2 ewes per hectare, it's not particularly profitable at all. So
right.
it's this real tie-up between per head performance and per hectare performance. But it's all comes together as a package of stuff that delivers a better outcome.
So, Trevor, most of the people listening to this podcast will be from the towns and cities. And I'm just thinking, for them listening to this, they would be saying from the environmental aspect, is your work environmentally, have an environmental focus on it as well?
Oh, very much. Yep. And so what I find reassuring is that a lot, if not the majority of those high-performing farms, and high-performing in terms of profitability, treat their farms very well. They don't do stuff that's destroying their soil structure. They're not doing stuff that's environmentally harming. And so there is certainly the ability to farm very successfully and be very kind to the environment. And I don't think that's talked about enough.
It's not.
Yeah.
It's not. And and I absolutely see the correlation. And I look at, I think it was last year. I can't remember whether it was last year or the year before when the farmers were having these evening meetings and very grumpy about the changes that the government were bringing in and around the environmental aspects. And I talked to the farmers within Collective Intelligence, and I said, how do you guys feel about this? And they said, we're doing it already. We've been doing it for the last 5 or 6 years. It's no change to us at all. And yet I went to some of those evening meetings and people were very, very grumpy and up in arms about all this communism and so forth pushing down on them. And our guys were just going, no, we're well ahead of that. Yeah, it was interesting. So how do we get that message out, Trevor? Because I am frustrated with the industry, the agricultural industry, of that the positive stories are not getting out. The great irony from where I sit is that Country Calendar is a wonderful weekly program that markets rural New Zealand to the cities, run by people from the cities. And I'm intrigued as to how we get those positive stories out to the rest of New Zealand.
I don't know, because I made some efforts earlier in the year as to try and where was the opportunity for those messages to be stronger. And I've given up because I haven't been able to find. I mean, I've written for 20 years a column in Countrywide, and I talk about some of this stuff, but I mean that's totally to a
that's all ag sector, isn't it?
Yeah.
We're not very good though, and I've had this conversation. We're not very good at telling positive stories to ourselves sometimes about ourselves. A little bit of Americanism in the New Zealand culture might be a good thing in the future, Trevor, because we're so stoic and low key that maybe it's biting us on the foot.
Yep, I agree.
Biting us in the foot, is that even a saying? I'm not sure.
In the bum.
In the bum.
Yeah.
But it is interesting to see, because I also see news items coming on TV from time to time with farmers, and there are times it makes me cringe because I go, that is not the top end being interviewed.
Yep, I totally agree.
And I'm not sure how that changes. Yeah. What do you see the biggest barriers for younger farmers coming through, Trevor, in their direction, their opportunities going forward at the moment?
Well, it depends where they are in the pathway to farming. So if it's buying a farm, it's just having the money to buy that farm is a major barrier. More and more leasing is becoming an option, but then again, currently, as much as good farmers are actually profitable, you've got to have the cash to get that stock and get it going, at the level it has to go at. So and at the moment there's a significant cost in that. So just getting there, but the barriers to actually farming well for young farmers are very, very small. I think the opportunity for young farmers is huge.
And are they coming from traditional backgrounds, from farming backgrounds, or are you seeing them coming in from the cities as well now?
A lot coming from the cities.
And how are they doing?
Oh, extremely well. They don't come with any baggage.
Right. Yeah. Yes, interesting. I remember when I was at Lincoln, and I saw some of the farmers then, my age, going back when we were 1920, some of them that came off very traditional, very well operated traditional farms came with so much baggage on what couldn't be done. It was a big deal then. They couldn't grasp. I remember Professor Coop talking about, Coopworths and so forth, and the traditional Romney guys were just almost gagging at the thought of these new sheep and so forth. Yeah, the sustainability of farming, Trevor, going forward. How sustainable do you see the industry in New Zealand going forward?
I see it. I'm not concerned about its sustainability, in that we know we can farm well and look after the bits that we need to look after. But you could argue that one of the big flaws in our farming systems is the fact that we import masses of phosphate from overseas to put on our land. But the companies tell us that's a huge supply that we needn't worry about, but it still seems an area of weakness, that our systems are so dependent on imported minerals.
And then there's all sorts of other aspects about where that phosphate comes from and how it's mined, and
that's right.
There's all sorts of social and concerns about that. What are your thoughts on this regenerative movement within New Zealand?
I think that it's poorly defined, so therefore it's largely misunderstood. It's got concepts in it which certainly have been applied to good farming systems for a long, long time. It's in its early days, and so what it can deliver, I think, is still to be proven. And I do work with, one of the very large regenerative systems down in the South Island, and I like what I see. But I'm yet to see. I'm yet to be convinced that it's going to achieve what it says it's going to achieve.
And so I think that farm was on Country Calendar a while back, Trevor, wasn't it? Yep. And had huge coverage. I think it was the most viewed program in 10 years or something, and came across very... So you're working directly with those guys now?
Yep.
And what are the learnings there for you working in that type of system?
Probably the biggest one is just thinking outside the square, just not being confined with what you were doing, that there isn't a different way. That would be, there's nothing new in that, but that very much is, for some of that stuff, is required quite a totally different look. Yep,
and because the regenerative thing, and I agree about the definition, and I go, does it need to be? Maybe not. But I think there needs to be a huge amount of observation, which the good guys, traditional guys, do anyway. But there needs to be, a far more observation than possibly other systems.
Yeah.
Do you view the ag sector being as part of the food sector? How do you I was going to say marry those two industries up? How do you view those two things?
I certainly see it as part of the food sector, but I don't think farmers see it as part of the food sector. Well, a lot of farmers don't see it as part of the food sector. It's a whole industry, an animal industry that's got a food product, but not treated as a food product.
Right. Other parts around the world see ag as being in the food sector, or is it the same across the?
Probably not a whole lot different. It's just when you get over to the UK with a much larger population, there's a lot more niche marketing of of product from farms. And that niche marketing where the farmers are so much closer to who eats the product, there's a lot more awareness of them being in the food industry. Whereas for most of our farmers, they really are just commodity producers, and that connection with their market is so distant.
Just thinking, Brian Richards, I saw him recently. Do you still work with Brian?
No.
But I remember some years ago I had the pleasure of working with him. I saw him, and for those listening, he's a branding guru across lots of different sectors, but with a real love of farming. And he talked about the problem within New Zealand farming is that we've got very good at producing more for less and wanting us to produce less for more and seeing the opportunity in those niche areas. You would have the chance to work with some people who are supplying food into niche markets?
Oh, yes.
Yep.
Yep.
And are they the same group of farmers that in that top quartile? Is it the same group?
It varies, because the irony of that is that a lot of those highly profitable, high-performing hill country farmers are just producing lots of commodity product.
Right.
And it's still a pathway to being very profitable. But maybe that gets away from what's farming all about, and farming is all about the journey. And is there a whole lot more enjoyment out of seeing yourself as part of a bigger value chain, where you personally have a responsibility for that product to be high quality.
How would you define the journey, Trevor? You've brought that up 2 or 3 times. I haven't really heard that before. How would you define that journey of a farmer?
It's what happens every day in life. It applies to everybody, not just farmers. But farming is very much around making everyday work, make it happen, and the things happen as they're meant to happen as part of a bigger plan for that farm to produce as much as it can. And it's a constant journey. Every day, every week, every month, there's inputs that have to happen to get that outcome. And it's an all-encompassing journey. For farmers, it's an all-encompassing journey because it takes up their whole life. And the end result is what? Is the end result? What is the end result? Do you think, I've had enough of this and just move on, sell the farm? Is it that I stop spending money on the farm to break in more land or put in more fences or do this or that and just accumulate more cash? And I think, yep, that's fine. But in actual fact, the real satisfaction and joy and achievement is what happens on that farm on a day-to-day basis and on a month-to-month basis, a year-to-year basis. It is the journey.
It's a lovely description, and I reminded that farmers are very good at sensing and responding.
Yes.
So they've always got that long-term view, but every day they're tweaking, aren't they?
Yep, that's right.
Yeah.
Yep.
And it's amazing how much it varies through the days and through the seasons. Mm-hmm. And a week in farming can also be very long. From at times that things can change very, very quickly.
Yep.
Yeah. Trevor, to round out this conversation, what have we missed? What else would you like to add into this conversation?
I guess my vision of where I would like to see farming, and it comes back to this ownership of product, so that We go out to work today on the farm to produce this product, which we have ownership of that product right through to when someone consumes it. We have ownership of it in some form, all the way through to when someone consumes it, and so it's a whole, almost family production family, where you just at one part of it, you're at the producing end, but the steps along the way that you're a part of. It's almost a dream. But I see niche marketers are doing it. Some of the niche marketers are doing it, and I look at them and I think, wow, they're getting they're enjoying the journey in terms of what they do every day to increase production, but they've added to that. Part of that journey is that they're all part of other people's journeys.
And what? Give us an example of what those niche companies are doing. Who are they in lamb or beef, or what are the companies that are doing this?
Well, the ones that are doing it where that product, that consumption can be traced right back to the farm.
Are you able to name those companies?
I mean, First Light have excelled in doing that, in creating that real direct link between the producer and the consumer. And those, they have been able to access farmers that are markets that have rewarded them for doing that, but it hasn't necessarily been a guarantee. But those farmers that are doing that, my contact with them is that they're actually really proud and really enjoying being part of that relationship with their market, with their consumer. And so again, I come back, focus on what makes that journey more important, more enjoyable, as much as what makes that journey more profitable.
Yep. And the two are linked. I mean, nobody enjoys not going broke while they're in business, but that correlation between the two, and it's also a hell of a lot more work sometimes too.
Yes.
And attention to detail, and look, I remember being part of a lamb tasting exercise about 4 years ago, and it was with a specific type of lamb. And it was fascinating watching the farmers taste their lamb, and their taste for lamb was very poor. It was fascinating. They were not connoisseurs of their own product. And if I look at the wine industry, and we have a bit to do with the wine industry, and you see, and I know it's different, but you see the winemakers just how wrapped up they are in tasting other people's wine and so forth. And I thought, if we could bring that passion and skill into tasting lamb and venison and beef and really understanding those properties, how that might change the behaviour of the farmers.
Yeah, I agree. But the reality is that we just produce thousands of tonnes of product, which are very hard to get into that niche model. So my dream of what that perfect farming system would look like can only, in our current, the way we currently farm is only going to apply to a small number that can access those more niche markets.
Is that because we don't have enough niche marketing companies, or we don't have enough farmers that can produce to that quality?
No, I think if the markets were there, the farmers would respond. Absolutely, no question.
Be interested to see how long that takes, Trevor,
yeah.
and because the little I know about it, looking from the outside, is that the prices coming in from the niche markets now are considerably higher than the average, which is a great sign. Yeah, but I also know the work that's gone on behind the scenes with the likes of First Light, how bloody tough that is to get there. Yeah.
But always remember that niche markets are a big component of them being niche is being small.
Yeah.
Or not being large.
Yeah. Trevor, thank you for your time. Is there anything else that you want to drop in before we round up?
I don't think so. I just add, I guess, that I'm excited about what's ahead in terms of farming. I think the opportunities that are coming up for farmers that can farm well are huge. There are a few barriers that I think the country has to address, such as the amount of trees that we want in our good farmland. That is one thing that I am genuinely concerned about. The good farmland that is now in pine trees, and the discussion around the impact on that on our national debt is not even being had. It's been confined to what it does to local farming communities. But in actual fact, the big issue is what it does to our national debt.
So how are those two related?
Well, our national debt is going to be lowered by us earning export earnings. Our export earnings at the moment are in meat and milk. Those trees aren't going to earn any export earnings for 20 years. So what happens in the meantime when our cash flow dwindles because we're just not producing enough product to export?
Yep, haven't heard that conversation at all.
Yeah, it's real. The figures are there that show that.
Mm. And a lot of the country that is being planted now is not marginal land, is it?
No. Well, my own business on the east, over the range, where we've lost around about 40,000 stock units that we service because that land's gone into trees.
Yep.
Well, I mean, there's a cost all round locally to that, but there's a big cost there's a whole lot of that. I can't remember the figure, but probably half of those stock units are going to be exported. No longer are they going to add to our export earnings.
And Trevor, are those trees being planted for carbon or are they being planted for wood?
Mainly for carbon.
Right.
But
so those trees might not be cut down at all?
Well, no. The bit that hurts is a lot of them are on very good farmland, so they will be harvested because they're on such nice contour land.
Right.
That's the bit that really hurts.
Yep. Yep, and I've seen lots of... and is that driven by government policy at the moment?
Well, it's driven by an ETS policy that saw trees as being the saviour of our carbon status, when again the analyses have been shown that isn't going to be the way that we reach this carbon zero target.
Mm.
So in my opinion, it's an ill-conceived concept. I don't argue with the objective, but I just don't think it's been thought through the pathway to get there.
It's interesting. I interviewed Stuart Ellingham a few months ago, and he was talking about this year that they are planting 400 and something hectares of their farming operation and trees.
Yeah.
And that won't affect their production at all. In fact, it might increase their production by having targeted. Now, that's a huge area.
Yep.
And, you said it's going to complement what they're doing now.
Yep.
And I think about that, and I think that is a huge piece of land. So there is an opportunity there that I think is actually happening now anyway in a lot of farms. That there is a lot of planting going on within farms.
Oh yes, which I've got no problem with.
Yeah,
it's just that there are companies out there buying whole farms to put into trees.
Yeah, and they seldom come back. They do come back sometimes, but they seldom come back once they've been there. Trevor, thank you for your time.
You're welcome.
Keep up the good work. What's next for you in your profession, Trevor?
Well, I talked before about the journey, and my life is very much about the journey. I just don't think about where it's heading. I get so much enjoyment and satisfaction out of doing what I'm doing and the people that I work with that I'm happy to do this forever.
What a great way to finish. Good luck, Trevor, on forever. You've just been listening to an episode of Stuff That Matters Now, brought to you by Collective Intelligence. I hope you enjoyed listening to the fun stuff, the rugged stuff, and the complete stuff-ups that have helped this particular Collective Intelligence member evolve while making the world a better place. Do check out our Stuff That Matters Now podcast series on your favourite podcast provider, or visit our website www.collectiveintelligence.co.nz to get links to new episodes. Contact us if you want to learn more about how we can help you evolve yourself and others. Thanks for listening.